Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the Prime Minister for the advanced copy of the statement. 16 months on from the referendum, no real progress has been made. The Prime Minister delivered yet another definitive speech, designed to herald a breakthrough, which instead only confirmed the confusion at the heart of government. Mr. Speaker, if we want to judge the progress the government has made since triggering Article 50, we shouldn't just look at the latest Florence speech. We should also look back at the Prime Minister's last big Brexit speech in January, where she outlined 12 objectives for Brexit negotiations. And, Mr. Speaker, how many of those objectives has the government met 10 months down the line? The answer, none. The Florence speech, in fact, demonstrated the scale of the mess the government is making of these negotiations. 15 months on from the referendum, we're still no clearer what the future of this country will look like. The question must be asked, what on earth has the government been doing all this time? Calling an election in which voters refused to give the Prime Minister the mandate she wanted. Since then, Cabinet Ministers have been squabbling amongst themselves all that time. 15 months wasted. I'm sure the Prime Minister wanted her speech in Florence to bring life to these critical negotiations. On the substance of the speech itself, I'm pleased that the Prime Minister has taken Labour's lead and accepted the need for transition as we leave the EU. However, Mr. Speaker, it is still unclear what the Prime Minister envisages for a transitional period or how long it will last. The Prime Minister said the implementation period would last around 2 years, yet the Foreign Secretary interprets that as 2 years and not a second more, while the Chancellor hints it might be more. He's here, he could correct us on this. She told us during a transition, access to one another's markets should continue on current terms. Yet, at the Conservative Party conference, the Secretary of State for International Trade contradicted this and said, we will leave the single market and the customs union at the end of March 2019. The immigration minister told his party conference that freedom of movement will end as we know it in March 2019. So how does this square with the Prime Minister's assertion that we continue on current terms during the transition? It can't be both. Can the Prime Minister clear up the confusion and tell the House exactly what her implementation period means in terms of the single market, customs union and freedom of movement? Mr. Speaker, on the financial settlement with the EU, the Prime Minister has offered to commit funds to ensure no EU member state has to pay more into the EU budget until the end of the current framework. We welcome this as a sensible offer. However, can the Prime Minister confirm whether the UK will be willing to pay money to the EU post-transition to access programmes which benefit this country? It's an important issue for many parts of Britain. On the issue of citizens' rights, the Prime Minister says this is an area where progress has been made with the EU. I'm sure that many colleagues in this House will testify to the level of concern and indeed desperation of many of our constituents who come to our surgeries across the country in fear that families and friendships will soon be ripped apart. So, Mr. Speaker, no, it's not scaremongering, Mr. Speaker. This is a serious issue. This is a serious issue that affects many people in this country, day in, day out, who are frankly frightened of the future. So, Mr. Speaker, I call on the Prime Minister again today, listen to the TUC and the CBI and unilaterally guarantee the rights of EU nationals living in the UK. Given, Mr. Speaker, that this House voted in July 2016 to unilaterally guarantee the rights of EU citizens, can the Prime Minister finally reflect the will of the House and give people and businesses the assurances they need? On Northern Ireland, we welcome the drafting of joint principles, but 15 months on from the referendum, we should be beyond platitudes and negotiating the practicalities. Yep. Mr. Speaker, the speech in Florence was supposed to put momentum into the Brexit negotiations. It is staggering. It is staggering, Mr. Speaker, that after...
there was a lot of noise when the Prime Minister began her statement, and I indicated that people should calm down, and the same applies now. The right honourable gentleman will be heard. He will be heard with courtesy, and he will be heard in full. Jeremy Corbyn.
It is staggering that after 8 months since triggering Article 50, the government has made so little progress. The Secretary of State for International Trade said a deal with the EU should be the easiest in human history. That's what he said. Now the reality for this Tory government is beginning to bite. But if things do not improve, the reality may soon begin to bite for the jobs and living standards of the people of this country. These negotiations are the most important in Britain's recent history, vital to our future and vital to our economy. Just at the moment when Britain needs a strong negotiating team, we have a cabinet at each other's throats. Half of the Conservative Party want the Foreign Secretary sacked. The other half want the Chancellor sacked.
We want both of them sacked.
Mr. Speaker.
Order! I say to the honourable gentleman, the member for Braintree, that I'm advised that he is being groomed for statesmanship. And I say to the aspiring statesman, it is in the circumstances impolitic at best and rude at worst for him to point. I am trying to help the honourable gentleman. Jeremy Corbyn.
Rather than fighting over their own jobs, the reality is that millions of people's jobs and living standards depend on the success of these negotiations. If this government can't negotiate a deal for Britain, they should make way for a team that can.